I think safety is an issue that a lot of people don't talk about. So for sports, whether it's a collegiate female or a high school female, we got to make sure it's safe for them to play. And I think I look at it as fair, it's safe, it's equitable, but it doesn't address where do our trans athletes go. I don't have an answer. I wished I did. And so these bills, again, are just protections of our biological females and girls. And I don't know what to tell the trans kids other than, I'm sorry, but we got to figure something out for you, but I don't know what it is.
Hello, and welcome back to The Perch from the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle. I'm Noah Zahn, your local government reporter here at the Tribune-Eagle. This week, we're bringing you the second part of a two-part episode. Last week, on The Perch, you heard from Santi Murillo, an advocate for the queer community in Wyoming and the first trans athlete at the University of Wyoming. She spoke in opposition to some bills the state government is considering that would implement further restrictions on trans women competing in sports in the state. Today, you'll hear a conversation with State Senator Wendy Schuler, the primary sponsor of one of those bills. Hers, Senate File 44, would prohibit trans women from competing in collegiate sports in Wyoming. That's who you heard at the start of the show. This bill is an expansion from a 2023 bill she sponsored that was signed into law. It banned transgender athletes from competing in female public school sports in grades 7 through 12. Our reporter, Ivy Secrest, spoke with her last week. Here's that conversation now.
We're so happy to have you on this podcast. Thank you for coming. You've also been a former basketball player and a coach of basketball. You qualified for an Olympic team back in your day at one point. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with sports and why you feel compelled to sponsor this type of legislation?
Early on in my early life, I found out that there weren't a lot of opportunities for girls. Clear back from when I played Little League with my brothers and a cousin, and we won a regional playoff, got to go to Utah, and I was told when I got there that I couldn't play because I was a girl. And so that was probably my first, kind of slap in the face moment where, oh, you don't get to play because you're the wrong sex. Okay, so... and then, of course, it happened a little bit later on in junior high and high school. There weren't some opportunities that some of the guys had. And so I was asked to maybe try out for the boys' team in basketball in high school. And so I thought about it. And so they actually petitioned the high school to see if I could do that. And the superintendent, he said, no way am I going to have a girl play on the boys' team. So we'll get a girls' team together. So I think, if nothing else, maybe my early days of being, having the door shut in my face, it kind of made me go, okay, I've got to keep fighting now for girls and for their opportunities. And then obviously I got to UW and I competed in a variety of sports there. And, the opportunities increased quite a bit. And then I got the opportunity to go ahead and coach high school girls and all school boys as well. And so I've always been a fighter for the girls and making sure that our biological girls have every opportunity they can, because I didn't. And I feel like that fairness and equity and safety, those things are all just as important for the girls as they are the boys.
A lot of these bills, we are seeing several bills at this point in the legislature that are addressing people who are trans in the community. And House Bill 60 and Senate File 44 are the two that would specifically address transgender women in women's sports. And I'm curious, as someone who was excluded from a sport before, who knows what it feels like to not be allowed to play, what are the intent of these bills and why do you feel like we need them in Wyoming?
Well, honestly, the first bill I sponsored that went through was Senate File 33. And it just basically provided equal opportunities for the girls and not trans athletes, obviously, in grades 7 through 12. Because, again, we were starting to see an increase in trans athletes that were competing against our girls in high school. And like I said, some of these particular girls, their positions were taken and some of their awards were given to trans athletes. That concerned me a bit more. So the first bill I brought, it was just concerned with 7 through 12. And again, and it was no angst towards the trans athletes, none at all. And I was asked a number of times when I was moving the bill through the House and the Senate, well, what about the trans athletes? And I couldn't come up with an answer. other than I just felt like our biological girls need to have their spaces safe. They need to have fairness, equity, and bottom line is it's all Title IX. So I don't know the answer yet to the trans athlete. Okay, so then we were told it was going to be litigated, and so I did have a backup plan for that bill, which basically just said, all right, if you're a trans athlete and you're in a sport that maybe isn't going to require an unsafe situation, like let's say you're a skier. We actually did have a trans skier, and you're skiing, separately. Maybe you're doing the slalom or whatever. You're not going to be in a situation where a trans athlete that could maybe hurt you, or a volleyball player that's maybe hitting the ball 80 mile an hour or whatever. So that was kind of the backup plan. You can still compete. You can still train. Actually, I left it in there. You could train with the biological girls, but when it came time for competition, you would not be able to do that unless you go before a panel. And if they deemed it appropriate based on your sport, that you could still compete, like for instance, a skier. So then, and of course, this past fall, we had a San Jose State player that was trans, and of course, there were issues where some of the teams decided to forfeit rather than play against that person. And that may have been more of an issue of safety because, again, we'd heard some situations, anecdotally, of course, where there had been people that had been injured, been hit in the head. And so all of a sudden, then I started getting calls, are you going to do something about this? I wanted our girls to still be able to have the opportunity to participate. So all I said was that a trans athlete cannot play at the collegiate level at University of Wyoming or any of the community colleges in the female side. So that's all my bill does. And the House bill, it's a lot more complicated. And actually, she has it from K through 12 and then college, which I don't think is really necessary. I mean, we don't start seeing issues with changes until the kids start going through puberty. But once they start going through puberty and they're in middle school, that's when you start seeing the safety issues and the biological boys having quite an advantage, whether they just identify as females or whether they actually go through a transition. So that's the difference in my bill versus the one that's coming from the House. And if it goes to the House and they would want something similar to what I did with my other bill, I would certainly be willing to take a look at compromise.
Right. I mean, what comes to mind for me is Santi, who I spoke with earlier for this podcast, was a cheerleader. And that, based on your example of skiing, that sounds like one of the sports that may fall into, it's a little more individualistic. It's not necessarily going to involve, physical contact. And so you're saying more that, like, if you needed to do that, that is something you would still be open to.
Certainly. I'm always open to compromise, and I'm always, I want things to be done as fairly as we can. And so if that was something that the House wanted me to take a look at, I'd certainly do that, and we could base it on a sport versus just a blanket ban. So I'm always open to compromise. That's one of I think the things that I probably do best. As in the legislature, I try to look at both sides and try to find some way we can collaborate with both sides without just saying a flat no, this isn't going to work. I try to find some gray area if I can.
Right, absolutely. It makes me think one of the points that is brought up by the opposition to these types of bills is that a lot of people don't see it as protecting biological girls, which is how you've kind of framed these bills. A lot of the opposition to it, Santi included, see it as cruel to the transgender population here, especially since we've got 3 bills being considered that would address about 4 athletes by Santi's estimate. And I'm just curious, what is your response to having these bills called cruel and unnecessary, being that it's 3 bills addressing 4 athletes?
Well, unfortunately, just like I talked about with the high school bill, the first year I brought it, there were 4 high school kids approximately. There were 8 or 10 the next year. So it was starting to become kind of an issue. Now, as far as the collegiate athletes, we don't know how many. And it's right now because nobody's really pushed the issue or the envelope on it other than this volleyball player from San Jose State. But the bottom line is, I still just wanted to make it a safe space. Again, I think safety is an issue that a lot of people don't talk about. So for sports, whether it's a collegiate female or a high school female, we got to make sure it's safe for them to play and not being, hit in the head with a 80-mile-an-hour volleyball or whatever else. Is it cruel? I don't think it's cruel, but I think I look at it as fair, it's safe, it's equitable, but it doesn't address where do our trans athletes go. I don't have an answer. I wished I did. And so these bills, again, are just protections of our biological females and girls, and whether it be at the collegiate level or the high school level. And I don't know what to tell the trans kids other than, I'm sorry, but we got to figure something out for you, but I don't know what it is.
I think that's a really interesting point because you referenced this 80-mile-an-hour volleyball to the head. I think that was something that kind of came up when the University of Wyoming was deciding that they were not going to play the San Jose State player. Mm-hmm. We spend a lot of time here at the paper looking at comments online and seeing kind of like what the different perspectives are. And of course, you have parents who are concerned about the safety of their kids. You also have parents who feel that it's a bit insulting to say that a collegiate volleyball player on the women's team couldn't possibly hit a volleyball at that speed. And so I'm curious, when it comes to the safety aspect of it, how valid do you think that those concerns about it being a bit insulting to say that women can't be as physically dominant in a sport as a man can?
Well, when you do the research on it, biologically, there's some things you can't change, no matter whether you have hormones or not. And I'll give you an example. When I was playing some pickup games in high school, my first knee injury came as a result of a 6'2" guy that weighed probably 190 pounds. We both went up for a rebound. He came down, tore my knee up. Now, have I played against gals that big? I've played with a couple. When I was at UW, I played with a couple of 6-footers, maybe a couple of 6'1" girls. But I never played with anybody that grabbed a ball out of my hand and threw me around like a rag doll and then stepped on me like this guy did. I think that's the difference. Physiologically, their muscles are so much stronger. You can't change the lung capacity. There's so many things you can't change whether you're taking hormones or not. Now, if you take a look at the collegiate women playing basketball right now and even the WNBA, there's some amazing athletes. I watched a couple of games this week where they had some 6'9", 6'6", 6'4" girls, but none of those guys will be playing like a Kobe Bryant or a Magic Johnson or, you know what I'm saying, just the strength and the ability to get hurt by a male athlete that's that same height versus what a female at that height can do. Just the physical aspect of what the male body can do. And so I'm not saying that a girl couldn't get hurt in the high school level as well as the collegiate level with bigger players, faster players, because they are much bigger and faster than when I played. But the chances are much more that if you're playing against a physiological male versus a female versus a trans athlete, that those safety concerns will always come to the forefront, and you're much more apt to get hurt with the biological males and trans athletes.
I think another criticism of these types of bills that has been coming up is, why do we need it with the executive order? We've talked a bit about the executive order, how President Trump has written this kind of sweeping ban of trans women in women's sports. And I do think it is kind of important to address why continue to push for these bills. Granted, they were written and introduced before the executive order, but why continue to push for these bills when we have it already up on, the federal level?
That's a really good question, and I thought about that. And I talked to a few of the legislators about that, and I said, should I just drop this? I mean, is it's kind of a moot point now, isn't it? And they said no, because, in 4 years there could be, possibly another Democratic president that might come back and change the executive orders, just like President Trump is changing a lot of the executive orders that President Biden had in place. And I thought about that, and I thought, yeah, you're probably right. So it was pretty much like, well, let's just do it. That way it's in place. That way if there's another president that comes in that's in a different party and has a different idea about it, we're at least covered. And at least at the collegiate level, we know that our female athletes will have their safe spaces with the ability to compete, in a safe arena with people that are of their biological nature.
One of the things that came up in my conversation with Santi was the Wyoming way. And you both, you guys have actually a lot of similarities. You both born and raised in Wyoming. You both coach. You both have been athletes. You both went to UW. And, Santi kind of talked about how these bills feel very cruel and antithetical to the Wyoming way, which we hear a lot about the Wyoming way, the, kind nature, the let me do in my house what I want to do, and I'll let you do in your house what you want to do, but I'm always going to help you mend your fence if you need it, whatever you need, I'll be there as a neighbor. And I'm curious, do you think that these bills are in line with that sort of cultural practice of like the quote unquote Wyoming way?
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, I don't know that I would have brought it right away if I hadn't had a couple of Wyoming parents that came in and had these concerns about our daughters don't want to compete. They had a boy that, and he wiped up at this track meet, and they both were saying, we want our girls to be able to compete and we want them to stay in sports. But if this is the way it's going, now that was in another state to the west of us, but I hadn't really thought about it before that. And then, like I said, as things started happening and we started seeing a few more issues come up and a few more athletes that were going this route, I started thinking, yeah, I need to step up to the plate. But the bottom line is, I felt like it was the Wyoming way. We've got to protect our girls. And, in terms of Santi, I've met her, like I said, I think just the world over. I have a lot of respect for her, and I've tickled pink that she's out there fighting. I just don't have the answer as to what we can do on both sides of the issue with it, other than I've got to protect the girls and the women in the high school, whether it's college or women or whatever. I've got to protect them as best I can. I have a lot of respect for anybody that stands up for whatever they believe. So, I'm just, I think what I do is the Wyoming way for me. A lot of other people might think it's not, but like I said, I've lived here my entire life, love Wyoming. But I totally get where some of the trans folks are probably going, wow, why would I want to stay here? I mean, I get that. I think there is a place for everybody, and maybe we just got to dig a little deeper and try to find some better solutions, better ideas for how we deal with issues like this and make everybody feel like they're a winner when we're done, because that's really what you want. And I want our young people to stay here in Wyoming. So I'm happy to be one of those people that would work with anybody, anytime to just make Wyoming the great state that it is.
That was reporter Ivy Secrest speaking with state senator and former collegiate athlete Wendy Schuler. Yesterday, Thursday the 27th, Schuler's bill unanimously passed the House Education Committee in a 9-0 vote and will now go back to the House floor for further consideration. House Bill 60, which was similar to Schuler's bill, passed the House and crossed over to the Senate, but died Thursday due to a committee deadline. However, part of House Bill 60 was amended into Schuler's bill. The new amendment prohibits collegiate women's teams from competing against other teams with a transgender player, including individual sports. If you haven't already listened, be sure to check out last week's episode to hear Ivy's conversation with Santi Murillo on why she believes these bills are a blatant attack on trans people in the state, and her concerns with the atmosphere elected officials are creating for trans people across Wyoming. And now here's Taylor Staples, our arts and entertainment reporter, to bring us a roundup of some of the upcoming events in Cheyenne and Laramie County this week.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Noah. So today, February 28th, the Capitol Building will hold their Capitol Collaboration Day event from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then at 7 p.m., Pride Cheyenne is hosting a One Hit Wonders karaoke event at Blue Raven Brewery. And Central High School has their production of Shrek the Musical from 7 to 9 p.m. Then, Cheyenne Little Theater Players is performing Sondheim on Sondheim at Mary Godfrey Playhouse for its third weekend in a row at 7:30 p.m. And finally, the Lincoln has an Outmar Liebert concert at 8 p.m. On Saturday, March 1st, Delta Kappa Gamma has their 41st annual book sale kicking off at 8 a.m. at the former Big Lots next to the trampoline park and will go until 5 p.m. Also, the first ever WYO Bounce Bash kicks off at the Event Center at Archer, taking place from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Then, at 10 a.m., the Wyoming State Museum has their monthly Family Day event. This month's theme is Tall Tales. And at 4 p.m., the All-City Children's Chorus will have their third concert this year titled Shakers. At 5 p.m., the Historic Atlas Theater is hosting Black Dog Bingo. And then Central High School will have their last day for Shrek the Musical at 7 p.m. It's also the last day for Sondheim at Mary Godfrey at 7:30 p.m. On Sunday, March 2nd, the Delta Kappa Gamma 41st Annual Book Sale will be from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Then it's day 2 of the Wyo Bounce Bash from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And at 3 p.m., Laramie County Community College will host a music concert titled The Nature of Music. Also at 3 p.m., the Wyoming Arts Council will have a poetry state competition and open mic at the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. On Monday, March 3rd, the library is hosting a Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. Gaming competition for teens at 3 p.m. And on Tuesday, March 4th, St. Joseph's Parish Hall is having their annual deep fried taco sale from 11:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Also, the Seed Library begins at the library at 6:30 p.m. with Jessica Fries talking about how to grow your own vegetables. Then, on Wednesday, March 5th, the library has chair yoga and poetry at 11 a.m. And finally, on Thursday, March 6th, the library has its teen writing club at 4 p.m. And CJ Box is coming for a book talk and signing at 5:30 p.m. for his latest Joe Pickett novel, Battle Mountain.
Thank you, Taylor, for that. And before we end today's episode, here's a quick roundup of some of our top headlines from our news stories over the past week. The Wyoming Senate says it won't pass a supplemental budget this year, which is a fund used to respond to emergency shortfalls in the biennium budget. A release from the Senate said that now is not the time to increase spending needlessly. A Laramie County district judge ruled that Wyoming unconstitutionally underfunded K-12 schools, finding that the state failed to properly account for inflation. A spokesperson for Governor Mark Gordon said that the governor's office is reviewing the ruling to consider an appeal. A Casper resident is bidding nearly $50 billion to purchase TikTok and move its headquarters to Wyoming. The bidder, Reed Reisner, who is also a former congressional candidate, now has around 30 days to complete the deal. And finally, the United States Postal Service announced that it will reverse its decision to process mail originating from Cheyenne with a destination in town, in Denver. Instead, local mail processing operations will remain at the facility in Cheyenne. To read the full stories, check our print edition or online. Now, that's all for this week's episode of The Perch. Thanks to Ivy Secrest and Taylor Staples for contributing to this week's episode. Be sure to tune in again next Friday for the next episode.